You gonna join me? No? Okay. Hello, I'm Dr. Becky Sage, and this is Sage by Name, my business clinic where I answer all your burning questions about how to start and grow your business. I answer real questions from real humans who are trying to build real businesses. And it's all based off years of starting and growing my own businesses and working with hundreds of other founders. When you ask me a question, I am going to be out there asking other people what they do, what their advice would be, and then I'm going to filter that through my lens of my knowledge of what it actually feels like to be a founder. So even though this series is called Sage by Name, I will let you decide if it's Sage by Nature too. Don't forget, if you've got any questions, just post them in the comments below, or you can message me over on Instagram. And this can be any questions on business, on leadership, funding, and all those other human things that exist around that. Today we've got a little bit of a mixture of questions, so it's going to be very, very useful for you if you are just thinking about starting a business, or if you're a little bit further down the line and you are currently finding that working with people is maybe challenging in one way or another. And I will be touching on some of my own personal journeys and the personal things I do as somebody with autism and a chronic health condition. So let's get stuck in. So the first question is, what steps do I actually have to take to start my business in the UK? So I'm hoping if you're asking this question that you've already seen my other video about the things I think you should do prior to actually making that decision to jump in and start the business. Starting a business can be a really big deal because if you start a business, that makes you legally responsible for it as an entity. So that's really the first thing I would say in terms of just understanding what your roles and responsibilities are as somebody who is going to legally be in a director role. Now, in the UK, Companies House and HMRC are the places to go to make sure that you're really up to date with how everything is working. And if I was to go through everything that you would need to do in this video, it'd last forever. So it's really important that you go and you look at all the details that are being provided to you. I also get a newsletter that comes from HMRC that's about up-to-date legislation, making sure that you know all of the new things that are changing in terms of your roles and responsibilities as a director. Now, the steps that you actually have to take are that you have to register your business, and you do actually have several options here. You could establish yourself as a sole trader, which would be a little bit different to establishing yourself as a limited company. And there's a really great table on the .gov.uk website which shows you what it means to be a sole trader versus what it means to be a director of a company. So before you do anything else, I would suggest you go and look at that table and look at what it means to you. It gives you lots of information on what you have to do in terms of registering, what you have to report, what your responsibilities are, things like VAT and finances. So head over to there. I'll make sure I link that in the description. Now, if you're thinking about setting up a company, officially you can't start trading until you have established that company. Both sole trader and limited company, you have to make sure you're keeping all financial records. And I find the easiest way to do this is to establish your bank account. So first thing I would do would be to register the business. If you've decided that's the route that you're going down, you're going to need a name for your business. You're going to need to know who are the directors of that business. And new legislation, and this is something I haven't actually done yet because I don't have to do it until when I have to file my confirmation statement, but new legislation is that you also have to now provide proof of identity when you set up a business in the UK as well. So you are going to have to go through some extra steps. Some of the other things you have to do while you are registering are things like accept the Articles of Association. Now, depending on who you are, you may or may not want to agree to the template articles. Most companies I know do that in the beginning, unless there's any particular reasons not to do that. And if you're not sure, have a chat to somebody with a legal background about what you might want those articles to say. When you set up a limited company, you do need to pay a little bit of money to set up that company. It's not very much. I think it's about £15 that you have to pay. When you choose your name for your company, you've got to make sure it's not too similar to other company names, and you can check that on the register on Companies House. And if it's too similar, you might have to change it if somebody makes a complaint. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just do a little check. which you'll want to do anyway, because you will want to be able to distinguish yourself from other people out there in the market. So I mentioned setting up a bank account. For me, this is the easiest way to keep track of what you're doing. Make sure that you keep your business finances just completely separate to everything else that you're doing, and try to make sure that everything you're doing flows through that business. The beauty of it now is that some of the business bank accounts are so easy to use. My bank account will even do all of my business filings for me as well. So things like payroll, things like end of year, corporate accounts. And so I guess this comes down to something else that you will need to be thinking about as well. So if you're setting up this business, you need to know that you're going to be able to file your accounts when you need to do that. You need to make sure you're doing your confirmation statements. You will need to put an address into Companies House, and you need to make sure that you can access what comes to that address and any communications that are being sent to you. Companies House now do tend to send you different things through different channels, but it's really important that you're going to receive and keep an eye on those communication channels, because one thing Companies House or the government really doesn't like is if it's asking you for something and you don't do it within a certain period of time. So you've really got to make sure you're on top of all of that reporting that they need. Now that might sound like a lot, but it's not actually that crazy. It's just you need to know. The main things you need to do is you have to keep records about the company, and you have to keep accounting records. So once you've established the business, make sure you're doing those things. If you're establishing it by yourself, there's not going to be an awful lot of records, but as you move through your journey as a founder, you're going to have more and more records. There maybe are going to be more directors, more shareholders. So this is the stuff that's not necessarily the most fun stuff about starting a business, but it's kind of that very, very functional thing that you need to do. And I know some founders I work with, I've had to kind of sit with them as they go through this process, just because it can feel very daunting, because you are kind of taking on this legal responsibility, and the government has oversight of that, as they should, right? We can't have all of our businesses being all over the place. So do make sure that you've really read through and you've gone step by step on all of those processes, that you've then got your bank account set up and that you're following those records. If you're paying people, there are more rules for that, but we won't go into that right now because I don't think that's what the question is about. So really, yeah, it's actually quite straightforward, the steps you have to go through. You might even be surprised how quickly and easily you can do it. The addition of the identification will probably mean it takes a little bit longer than it would have done in the past. And then, of course, there's all sorts of other things you then need to do as you begin to get your business off the ground, that are actually to do with running a business rather than just administering it. But those are the steps that you need to take. Register the business, get your bank account, make sure you're keeping good records, and be aware of your responsibility as a director. How do you get the stamina to keep your business going while having a chronic illness and doing gymnastics? So I should say, just for pure clarity at the moment, I have a portfolio career, so I'm not running kind of a high-tech, high-growth business right now, but I have done whilst doing gymnastics and whilst having a chronic illness and being undiagnosed autistic. So I thought I would just share some of the things that have helped me out along the way, and it's really not that complex, actually. Sleep is really, really important to me. So first and foremost, I protect my sleep as much as I can. If I don't protect my sleep, I get flare-ups of my chronic illness. I also find my mental health suffers as well. So, and when I say I get sleep, there will be months on end when I'm maybe getting 12 hours a night. A regular night's sleep for me that feels good would be something like 10 p.m. till 7 a.m. So that would be about 9 hours. Right now I'm going through an actual flare-up, so I need a lot more sleep than 9 hours. So of course that's not always very easy when you're trying to do all of those other things, but I am, like I said, very protective of it. Doesn't mean that occasionally I'm not doing something where I feel like, okay, this is a priority, and so I will stay out later, or I'm getting up earlier. But really protecting my sleep. How do I protect my sleep? I think the most important thing is a phone curfew. I put my phone down at 8 p.m. and it's in a different room. No one can get to me. I'm not going to be talking to anybody at that time, unless, again, it's kind of a special scenario. Same goes in the morning. I don't pick my phone up until after I'm dressed, ready, had my breakfast, ready for the day. My phone is connected to my Alexa, so if there was an emergency phone call, then that would come through. But just day-to-day activities, it's away, it's out of my room, and I think that that's definitely the thing I noticed has the biggest difference. If I'm on my phone, it's always takes me at least 2 hours to be able to decompress from that. Doesn't mean I'm not on screens. I do watch TV. It's not like a holier than thou type situation. I also know there's certain circumstances where it's really hard to do that. If you're a parent, if you're away from your children, for example, then you're going to want to have your phone by your side. So that's the biggest thing. Food and nutrition comes into it too. Exercise also comes into it. So it's all of those basic things. I don't drink, or I very, very, very rarely drink alcohol. I think I've had about 3 sips in the last year. And I try to exercise most days. Again, I'm in flare-up at the moment, and so I have to adapt what I'm doing. But for me, the thing that actually keeps me going, because if I just did that, if it was just sleep a lot and have a phone curfew and exercise and eat right and drink right, that by itself is not going to keep me going in terms of stamina for a business. I think there's other things that then really motivate me, and that's all about the types of activities that I'm doing. I have to feel like the goals are easily reachable, and it really comes back to just kind of general motivational theory, like what are those intrinsic motivators, as well as some of those hygiene factors that need to come into play. So motivational factors for me that are going to keep my stamina going, like I said, are being able to see the goals, the vision of what I'm working for, and that being meaningful enough. I find having other people on my team to be really motivating, and I find that really helpful to give me stamina. I find it very easy to get into the flow of any activity, but I'm also trying to stay really, really present. So I had a scenario the other day when I was doing some work with a small group of people, and we were out about, and then we went for lunch, and somebody else around the table was able to like sit down and really get her head into doing some research for what we're going to be doing in the afternoon. And that type of thing I really struggle with, actually. So for me, it's all about like being very, very present and focused on whatever that situation is. So if it's people and I'm there with people, I struggle to then get my head into something else. Hence, I need an awful lot of alone time, which when I find it very easy to focus. And again, I'm neurodivergent, right? So hyper-focusing is not really something that's a problem for me if it's something that I want to sit down and do, and if it's clear what tasks I'm meant to be doing. And I guess that leads me on to the final thing about process and habits and habit building and habit stacking, having routines. All of this is really important, and this also helps to keep me going. The next question, I'm really trying to delegate, but I keep finding myself needing to do 90% of the work, even if I've allocated it to somebody else. This is quite a common thing, and I already talked in the last or the previous Sage by Name video about delegation and what can be helpful with that. And I think maybe one of the things I didn't fully go into, which was actually something that Brian Chesky talked about, and I researched in the Airbnb deep dive video. Not all the tasks you're doing will be delegatable at a certain point in time. And there's a couple of things to bear in mind. Number one, when you are working with other people, there's definitely a training phase that is required. So if you are delegating, you need to be getting them up to speed, making sure they've got the skills and helping them to develop the skills they need to complete those tasks. Knowing how you want it done for this business, so setting those expectations. And then you've got to figure out that right time to step away. So in the beginning, that training phase, you are going to be more involved with the things that they're doing. What's the difference between micromanaging and training? Well, I think some of it's just about how, right? It's about being respectful of that person and believing that they can develop the skills and doing good training, good teaching, allowing them to actually do the thing instead of just watching you do it, for example. Although watching you do it is one part of the training. So I think definitely if you still feel like you keep having to get your hands in, one aspect of that might be that you feel like you need to train people a little bit more. I was talking to a group of founders and leaders the other day about this topic, and the next thing that came up was all just about really the mindset and the permissioning. What most people were saying was it's quite hard actually to delegate, and it doesn't really feel easy, and so you might need to push yourself out of the comfort zone a little bit. Don't do it on like the most high risk tasks in the business, but even there might be things where it just feels very uncomfortable to let go of it, but that is just your control that is holding you back, as opposed to actually this person can do a good job. So I think having that mindset that everyone, especially those who have that kind of founder mentality, are probably going to find it hard to delegate certain tasks, but you've got to do it in order to then figure out exactly how much others can do and the parts that can't be done by others. And then I think the final thing to say on this is there are going to be some tasks where you do need to be really in it all the time. And again, Brian Chesky gave the example of press releases earlier on in the business, or like some very specific press releases even later on in the business. There are certain things where he needed to see it and they had to go back and forth many, many times. And then later on, that was not necessarily something that was as important because there were other people who knew what needed to be said, there were the right teams around them who could construct these things, and maybe he only needed to do a final glance over the press release. So there may be things that you're struggling to give away because actually they are the tasks that you need to give your time to right now as a founder. Final question for today. Is it actually healthy to build a business that tries to keep you in the office as long as possible? For example, companies that bring food to your desk, that they have a gym, they have sleeping pods. So I think that the easiest way for me to answer this question is actually to come back to conversations about burnout, which I've made videos about in the past. And I'm going to go and get Dr. Claire Ashley's book because this is the best reference point if you want to know about burnout. And I guess when we talk about being healthy, humans being healthy, there's many different aspects of health, right? You've got your physical, your emotional, your mental health, or you've got spiritual health, you've got financial health. So there's many different aspects to health. And honestly, a lot of those businesses that try to keep employees there for a really long time are at least helping you out with your financial health, which may in turn help you with your mental health, your emotional health. Physical health, well, let's have a look at that. Because, oh, look, and I got a nice note from Claire inside this book as well. Anyway, so some things I found really interesting in this book are both looking at both workplace and individual factors that cause burnout. And so thinking about being in work, spending long hours in work, and whether or not that is healthy, which is what this question is, then let's look at the factors because they may or may not be to do with working really long hours. So the workplace factors that cause burnout are control, reward, values, community, fairness, and workload. So you will see there that that doesn't specifically say anything about the exact number of hours that you are at work. So for some people, having all those things in the workplace that allow you to go to the gym, go take a nap, that would be an element of control. To others, that would feel like they were being controlled because they're being kept in a prison. So it could be different for different types of people. Of course, what you're being asked to do, what's in your job, how much, again, you feel like you're in control of the decisions that are made in the workplace, all of those things are going to make a difference there. Reward, and so again, if you feel like by being in the workplace and doing those long hours, you're doing really meaningful work, you're getting to make an impact with your work, it's not just the financial rewards or benefits, it's those other intrinsic rewards that you're getting, then that also could be healthy for you. Values. This can be a very personal thing, but if you are being kept really long hours in an organization and you feel like what they're doing goes really against the way you think about the world and what you want to be doing and how you want to be living, then that could be a very unhealthy environment for you. But if it's very aligned, then it's a healthy environment. Community. So if you're in the position where you feel like you've got good friends at work, and often they say having a work bestie really indicates whether or not you're engaged at work, whether you feel like you have a good work life. But if you feel like you're part of a community, if you feel like you get on well and you have a sense of belonging within that workplace community, then that could be healthy. If you don't feel like you belong, then that's not so healthy. You can see where I'm going here. Fairness. So if you feel like there's a lot of injustice within the workplace, if things don't feel fair, if you feel like other people are getting treated better than you are, or even you can observe other people not being treated fairly, and this is a workplace where they're asking you to spend a lot of time, then that might feel really difficult. But equally, if it feels like a fair and just workplace, then again, that could be a healthy environment. And then workload. This is the one that is the most close, I think, to the number of hours you spend in the workplace. But really, the workload piece is all about, in this moment in time, are you able to carry out that work that is required, that is being asked of you? Have you got the resources, the time, the energy, the mental capacity, everything else in order to carry out the work that is expected of you? And of course, all of these things don't sit alone. It's all going to also be dependent on what else is going on in your life. So then there are individual factors that also mean that you might be more likely to end up in burnout or feel like your working environment is not very healthy. And those individual risk factors, as Claire puts in her book, are imposter syndrome, perfectionism, people-pleasing, personality type, your childhood, any trauma in adulthood, pre-existing mental health problems, coping skills, and neurodiversity. So all of those things are also going to be risk factors. And if you're then in the workplace for a long time and you're struggling with any of those things and the workplace isn't supporting you with any of those things, then that might be a less than healthy environment for you. And then, of course, there's other factors as well. So, for example, if you have a lot of caring responsibilities at home as well as at work, or if you're doing other things outside of the workplace that feel like there may be high pressure. So it might not just be about that working environment, it's also about roles and responsibilities outside of the working environment as well. And I just want to say a little bit on whose responsibility are all of these things. Partly because I think that we can think about this in two ways. So it's very normal for people to talk about burnout from the point of view of being an employee and not necessarily feeling like they are in control. So maybe they feel like that's part of why they're at risk of burnout, and that they feel detached from the organizational decisions. However, for many of you, you will be thinking about also building your own company, and what does that look like, and how do you make that healthy? And the way I see it is this: you can really look at those motivational factors that exist in the workplace. So all of those workplace risk factors for burnout, those are things that you can really help to overcome. When it comes to the individual risk factors, I do personally believe that as individuals, it is important for us to all try and access help and support in order to overcome those things. But there is something about the culture of the businesses you build as well that are going to be able to support people through some of those other risk factors. You'll have noticed in that list are things that a company culture can either kind of minimize for people or they can make it worse. So things like people pleasing, imposter syndrome, perfectionism, those things are all kind of held up by a company culture. If you have a culture that allows people to share their work, even if it's not completely complete, and to know that that's okay, this is about progress, it's not about perfectionism, then you're more likely to be able to kind of help people to overcome some of those things that they might have, because that people pleasing, that perfectionism, that comes from being in certain cultures that have built up that type of behavior, that type of thinking. So if I were you as a founder, I would be looking at those factors and thinking, how can we make sure that we do not build this into the business that we are building? Well, we went all around the houses today, didn't we? Lots of different types of questions. I hope if you asked those questions that they were helpful for you, and if you've got more questions, don't forget to ask them below. And I would very much appreciate it if you like and subscribe. This was Sage by Name. I'll let you tell me whether it was Sage by Nature too. And do let me know if you've got any of your own tips, ideas, thoughts, and comments. I'd love to read them. Bye.